But next, I'd like to introduce a digital designer, an absolute artist, Nathan Cunningham, who I had the privilege of working with in San Diego County for many years. Nathan is a demonstrative evidence specialist and also a certified video technician. And I'm going to let him introduce himself, and his presentation will be slightly different because we want to make sure that the tech on this is seamless. And so I will have him explain. Thank you.
Thank you, Sophia. I went ahead and pre-recorded the first part of my presentation in order to mitigate any potential technological hiccups. So I'm going to play a video first, and then I will resume the live presentation. Today I'm going to be demonstrating some examples of our work product in the form of linear and nonlinear demonstrative exhibits depicting 3D renders of crime scenes, medical examiner exhibits, animations, video clarification, image analysis, and more. So without further ado, let's begin. The initial items I want to show are examples of linear and nonlinear exhibits. The request that came in for the first item was to create a 3D model of a homicide scene in an apartment complex, using photos, blueprints, and scene visits to generate a linear exhibit to aid in witness testimony. As is often the case, there were no blueprints. The closest thing was the following excerpt from the original report. With the excerpt in conjunction with the scene photographs and aerial photos, I created a rough 3D model, the purpose of which was to expedite the measurement process during our scene visit. Using the available source materials, I constructed a 3D model of the scene and rendered it from different perspectives. I then created the following exhibit. So here we are looking at an aerial photo of the scene that I captured from Bing Maps. Now we're zooming into the area of interest. The red box represents the area that I modeled. What we're looking at here is a rendering of the 3D model. And now we're going to rotate it and remove the wall for visibility. The render has been adjusted to fairly depict a night environment and emphasize our area of focus that will be aiding the witness testimony. I also place callouts pointing out relevant locations. As we continue, the apartment rotates and we eventually end up in the apartment. The next items are examples of nonlinear exhibits. What we are looking at here is an aerial photo of the scene. We're going to zoom into the crime scene location. And now we are looking at a photograph of the front of the condo. Here it transitions into a rendering of the 3D model. Unlike the last exhibit, we now have some options. I can select different portions of the condo that I want to focus on. Let's check out the downstairs floor. This DDA wanted to be able to show photos of evidence items and their locations, as well as photographs of the overall scene. She also wanted to be able to toggle the icons on and off independently. Nonlinear exhibits are great and can be used with multiple witnesses. One of the many benefits is that you are not limited to addressing items in a scripted order. We can select item 1 and cycle through the photos. And now let's say we want to select item 4. We can do that too. How about an overview photo? There we go. And we can jump and cycle back through these in any order that we want. At any time, we can press the home button and return to the previous navigation screen. Let's say we want to look at the porch. There's our front porch. I'm going to show one more example of a nonlinear exhibit. This is an outdoor scene rendering with a similar navigation scheme to the previous example. For this exhibit, I was fortunate to get a copy of a 2D diagram to use as reference. I included the ability to toggle it on and off to help lay the foundation for the use of the rendered scene in place of the two-dimensional diagram. I also included a button to toggle the visibility of the shelter to view items obscured by the roof. The next example is a linear medical examiner exhibit. After I received the medical examiner's report and photographs, I searched the internet for reference photos of the victim while they were alive. I then created a model and plotted the injuries. On this particular case, the medical examiner was no longer employed by the ME's office and was working as a private consultant. They were not readily accessible and also required a hefty sum for their time. Because of this, I rendered out multiple views of the victim. I created a template, which is what we are looking at here. We then sent this to the medical examiner, and as you can see, it has instructions on how to fine-tune and adjust injury size and placement. Once the medical examiner made their adjustments and approved the placement and representation of the injuries, I created the following exhibit. This is a pretty straightforward exhibit, and in the interest of time, I'm going to step through a truncated version. The important thing to note is that these are rendered images of a fully 3D model, so we are not limited to the views shown in this exhibit. And finally, the totality of all the injuries. This next item is an example of a comparative analysis that was requested by the San Diego Police Department to assist with an active investigation. The initial request was to see if I could extract the license plate numbers of a questioned vehicle from videos obtained during and immediately after a hit and run. In this video, if you look at the top left-hand portion of the screen, you'll see the collision occur. As you can see, a couple of the videos look okay, but none of them clearly show the plate numbers. Clarifying video with the intent of deciphering a plate number is a common request. However, it is rare to recover one. Despite that, I put together the following comparative analysis to assist them with their investigation. In this initial slide, I pulled still frames from the video. Although deciphering a plate number is rare, there are often other identifying characteristics that you can use to narrow your search. After studying the video and doing some research online, I concluded that this was probably a 2014 or 2015 Kia Optima, based on the shape of the fog lights and other front-end characteristics that are not present in the 2013 or 2016 references. Of course, I'm not a car expert, but it seemed like a fair assessment based on my internet research. From there, I pointed out further similarities and differences. Here are some more still frames from the videos. The bottom image is frame averaged, which is a technique in which multiple video frames are overlaid on top of one another, and the transient information is averaged out based on the number of frames that details appear on. From there, I noticed that the license plate frame had some pretty distinct identifiers. You can see the curvature, the angles, shapes, and negative space. Based on these observations and some more research, I found some similar license plates. Here we have another frame averaged image and a cropped and enlarged portion of that image. There are also stills that I pulled from the original video and cropped them just to show the license plate. Beside that, I placed a font reference, and from there I studied the images, and based on the shapes and negative space as compared to known fonts, I came up with this list of partial numbers and number combinations. Based on my analysis, I suggested that they were looking for a 2014 or 2015 Kia Optima with a dealership license frame from Penske of Chula Vista and a list of possible plate number combinations. That weekend, they went out and they were able to track down some other leads. This is the vehicle that they recovered. As you can see, it was a 2014 or 2015 Kia Optima. The dealership license plate was from Penske of Chula Vista, and the plate combination corresponded with one of the possible combinations listed.
So Nathan, welcome back after the fabulous video. I want to ask you a few questions. What are some of the main programs that you used in some of the 3D modeling? If you can talk to us a little bit about that.
The main programs that I use to create the exhibits are, it really depends on the project. If I'm planning on creating a series of still renders like the examples that I presented today, then I'll do my primary modeling of assets in a program called Maya. Maya is a 3D modeling and animation application. It's widely used in the motion picture and video game industries. And then the next step is I'll generally export the model out of Maya and then import it into another program in order to texture and apply surface attributes. The program that I use is called Substance Painter, and that allows me to actually paint texture maps directly onto the model. And then from that, I'll export it to another external renderer called Keyshot to produce the final renders. And then depending on the project, I utilize other programs and plugins that are suited to specific tasks. Excuse me. An example is in the Emmy exhibit that I showed earlier. I used a plugin called XGen that was developed by Pixar for the movie Tangled. And I used that to create a fair and accurate representation of the victim's hair. And then once I complete the renderings, I compile and publish the final exhibit, and I give it to the DDA as a PowerPoint show file for use in court. And then that way, when the DDA double clicks the file, it automatically opens and in a presentation mode, and they can access it. It's globally accessible, and they can access it from within a familiar environment.
So moving on to the comparison exhibit, now that seems like it may have required some special training. Can you talk to us a little bit about your background and the types of training that other people in your division have undergone in order to do those kinds of comparisons that you went through?
Yeah, the main number one training that's relevant for this is it's a organization called LEVA. It's the Law Enforcement and Emergency Services Video Association International. They always want you to include that. But it's been valuable across the full spectrum of my position. And they offer a multitude of courses and certifications in the discipline of forensic video analysis and some forensic audio analysis as well. They have two main certifications. There's a forensic video technician certification, and then a board analyst certification. And the analyst certification requires the completion of several courses in their curriculum, as well as the submission of an approved and an actual case that's approved by them. And it also is one that you have to have rendered an expert opinion on. And then beyond that, you get assigned a mentor, and then you have to go in front of the LEVA board and defend your submission. One thing that LEVA really drives home, and I can't recommend them enough, is just knowing your lane, knowing your expertise, and knowing your lane and how to stay in it. For example, I would never give an opinion in court regarding the make and model of a vehicle. The example I showed earlier was a unique instance in which, I was assisting in an active investigation in order to locate a vehicle. But I would not submit the same analysis for court presentation. So,
just to interrupt you there, is it fair to say that that's something that you would work in conjunction with somebody else? For instance, you may prepare exhibits, but then you'd have somebody who did have expertise in car makes and models to come in and assist with that portion.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay.
And they help you to understand that distinction, because it's real beneficial for the defense to drag you outside of your lane, and next thing you know, you end up answering a question that you're not qualified to answer before anybody can object to it, and you know how that can go. Another thing that you learn is you learn about technology, how it works, and importantly, its limitations. So you can distinguish the difference between content captured in the actual video versus artifacts that may have been produced after the video is captured by like compression algorithms and other technological shortcomings. And so you learn how to detect those things and then explain them, understand them, and so it provides the basis for all of that.
So you've talked to us about some just fascinating things. How do you stay on top of this technology? How do you find the proper tools to continue to improve quality and increase the efficiency of exhibit creation?
Well, as far as staying on top of the technology, that's a huge passion of mine. I mean, I've been into 3D modeling and animation since 1994 when I was in high school. It's just something I've been interested in ever since I first became aware of it. I used to hang out at a local computer store that sold Commodore Amigas, and then I would spend days like scouring through books and magazines, learning about programs that were way out of my price range. And unlike those days, though, now we have access to countless training resources and programs at the press of a button. There's so much out there, and it's easy to stay on pace with emerging technologies if you choose to, if it's something that you're interested in. There's social media sites and groups dedicated to specific programs and disciplines within the 3D community. I join Facebook groups, I read forum posts, I engage with the forum communities. There are all kinds of communities online where people exchange information and show work and critique work and discuss tools, techniques, and emerging technologies. One of my favorites is YouTube. I absolutely love YouTube. It's one of my main go-tos. And another one, the Google. When I'm working on a project and something's taking way too long, or it seems like there should be a more efficient tool or technique, that's my number one cue to consult Google. In addition, I also have access to some paid training sites. LinkedIn Learning, which used to be lynda.com. That's a great one. It's a great site for finding out. They post a lot of training detailing and explaining software version upgrades. So if Maya comes out with a new version, an instructor on LinkedIn will post training detailing the new features added in the update, as well as how to use those features, and they do it in a timely manner.
So tell us about your next passion project. We want to, many offices may not have these resources, and fortunately, we're going to be talking to somebody next who might be able to help with some of these things. But you've really looked into the future, starting this stuff very early on. What's next?
My next passion project, I've been working a lot with real-time rendering and video game engine technology. There's been some major developments with hardware and software over the past 5 years that makes real-time rendering much more powerful and accessible. I'd like to work with this technology to help make some basic tools that are more geared specifically towards our industry. The software that I'm using is highly specialized and has a steep learning curve. It's also expensive and requires years of practice and continued use and learning to master. But fortunately, I don't think that has to be the case anymore. There are some extremely powerful applications that are free to use, and I would like to specifically tailor some of these, to create applications with minimal tools that allow for the creation of quality exhibits without the learning curve. One example might be a real-time 3D model of a human posed in the standard anatomical form or standard anatomical position that allows gives the user the option to change the sex, the height, the weight, and place injuries and trajectory rods in 3D space efficiently and intuitively. You could also add like the ability to toggle the skin and skeleton layers and on and off and add some basic animation options, so you could create like a turntable or something and then produce that. And then you could also package this as a standalone application that could be freely distributed. You could give it to the ME's office to plot injuries in 3D space, or use it internally to create demonstrative exhibits for court with little skill required. So right now technology is crazy. At this point, if you think that something should be possible, it probably will be in a few years. I have where is it? I have like a LiDAR handheld 3D scanning app on my phone, and I can import those scans into a free real-time game engine and manipulate the scans in real time. We can also integrate point cloud scans and then we could import those into real-time game engines, and then grab a video game controller and walk through the scene. And you could potentially give it to a witness and they could walk their path, and you could record that. And if you wanted to get crazy, you could throw a VR headset into the mix and they put them in the scene. So there are plenty of free applications and training resources that make this technology accessible to anyone who's interested in learning. So if you are interested, this is all stuff that we can do now. I can't imagine, what's 5-10 years down the road. But, if you're interested in any of this stuff, I'll post my contact information in the chat. Feel free to contact me with any questions. We can discuss this stuff further.
Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it to Chris for questions.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathan. I think you've demonstrated yet another aspect of crime analyst work where you clearly do the demonstrative evidence, but you are a bit of a 21st century detective as well. You were doing all of that work with the cars. So given the amount of digital evidence that's available, that kind of sleuthing can be very helpful to police departments that may not have the capability you have. I'm sure that the main feeling that everyone is having in this is envy, that they wish that they had people in their office that could do the work that you do. But are there any sort of tips for how you get started? Let's say you have an intern in your office or a younger person in your office. Is there some things that you think that they can do to start to learn this information?
Get on YouTube. That's one of the best ways. Look up 3D modeling and rendering. Any question you have, type it in there and see, what's out there. But like I said, a lot of this technology is geared towards video games, motion picture industry. So you kind of have to think outside of the box, maybe not don't go on there and say, hey, how do I create a demonstrative exhibit depicting a three-dimensional crime scene? Go on and depict, how do I get started with or ask, how do I get started with modeling and 3D animation? And even before that, find some videos that break down what that is, what the workflows look like. But also don't be intimidated and overwhelmed. There's a lot there's a lot of egos out there. So there's a lot of people that want to make things seem like it's out of reach. So one thing I would suggest is I mentioned some free applications and technology. One very robust one, and it can be intimidated, but there's an incredible community, is called Blender. And that's a fully functional open source 3D package that's free to download. It has an amazing community. And I've seen some incredible things come out of that. And you can do everything in it. There's also, like I mentioned, the real-time game engines. Those have a whole group of people that are using pre-made assets that you can drag and drop. And that's one of the things that I wanted to look into, for crime scene creation and stuff, was to be able to create a repository of pre-made assets and things that you can literally go in and drag and drop, and then be able to render out without the learning curve.
Yeah, and I see one of our participants is putting in some links to the sites that you're talking about.
Oh, great.
But someone has asked, clearly there are a lot of prosecutors on this call, so I'm going to ask you and maybe Sophia to pitch in also about the introduction of these 3D renderings. Do you get any resistance from the court? Are there questions about the accuracy of these diagrams, and how do you support its accuracy and its viability as evidence?
Yeah, there can be. It just depends. You really have to be aware of the context in which you're presenting the demonstrative exhibit, because a lot of time, sometimes, you also have to explain to the DDA what you're giving them and what you're not giving them. And I represent everything as not to scale, especially when working in 3 dimensions. If you go out and take measurements, you're not going to have the height dimension of everything down to, the furniture and all of that. So, I'll go out and I'll take the measurements, and generally the building is to scale. In fact, the example of the liquor store, I think it was the first example where the wall was removed. I testified on that, and the issues that came up, there were issues about the measurement, but it also gave me the opportunity on the stand to explain that even though it says not to scale, that the building itself was to scale and those distances were to scale. However, then I explained, how I modeled the furniture based on looking at photographs and their relationship to known measurements, and made an estimation. So either way, we always represent that as not to scale. And a lot of times you don't get much pushback. The pushback on this one was just to verify how we got the measurements, and then also to clarify that the lighting wasn't representative of the visibility of that particular nighttime scene, that it was just placed in there to make a fair representation of the fact that it was nighttime. So we had to explain that. But in a lot of cases, these exhibits can also be can be beneficial to all parties involved, especially the scene ones. So you don't get much pushback. And then as far as the medical examiner stuff, to mitigate that, I work very closely with different experts. And so I make sure that they're approving the work that I do as being a fair and accurate depiction of their data collection, so that they can lay the foundation for where items are placed and what's being represented. And then I only have to go in and discuss the items that I've created and the process for creating those.
Interesting. So the medical examiner, of course, will lay the foundation, for example, for all the wounds and all of that. That will already be in.
Yes. And
Yeah, go ahead.
oh, one last thing. I also try to help out because those with those photographs from the ME's office, those can be tricky to get in. And so, I keep an eye out with the 3D models to be able to crop those photos down to where they're purely clinical, but still be able to provide a context from where those came from. So, those are some of the other ways that we avoid some of the issues that come up.
Well, it certainly is very powerful to make the body of the person look like the victim himself, is a very powerful thing. I know that there are cameras, and I now forget what they're called, that do 3D photographing of scenes that are very accurate in terms of measurements.
Yes.
You use those kinds of cameras integrated with what you do?
It depends. I mean, a lot of times if I'm provided the correct files, I may import them into my exhibits to be able to use as a modeling reference. And then I get a much clearer idea of what measurements are. But I found that there's a lot of cleanup when you use those scans and that scan data. But like I said before, excuse me, if there's things that you want to do, just consider that we'll probably be able to do them in about 5 years. So you'll be able to, what those are called and what you get from those are point cloud scans. And so I can already drop those into a free game engine, like I was talking about earlier, and walk through them. So I do think, and the other thing I mentioned was my handheld LiDAR scanner. I actually just used this in a case where I can scan smaller scale 3-dimensional objects. And so I use this to scan my heating unit outside of my house for an arson case. And then I just imported the resulting model and texture map into the scene and actually use that as a building component. Then the other thing I did was I went out to a crime scene recently, and it was the first time I tried this app out. And I did a handheld, like, rough scan of the entire apartment with my iPhone. And then I brought that into Maya, and it's really streamlined the process of modeling that scene because I had the height measurements captured in the hand scan.
Oh, so this just dates me. I had assumed when you said scanning that it's like what you do with your printer, but
Yeah.
3D scanning where you can actually get the full, it's kind of doing what the cameras do that I just mentioned to you, that revolve and get that kind of 3D photographs.
That's exactly what it's doing. I mean, those are using LiDAR, and that's what you have in your phone. The newer iPhones have the ability to scan that data.
Yeah. No, this is all very, very interesting. I guess the day may come where the underlying technology of these apps may be called into question about their accuracy, though I presume you can prove their accuracy the old-fashioned way by going out with a ruler.
Yeah, I mean, that's you can't 100% rely on technology, but the important thing is, again, in understanding what you're representing and how you're using it. And I'm not, even there can be problems if you have a perfect scan of a crime scene. Like, you don't necessarily, for prosecutorial purposes, I mean, there could be all kinds of bias items in that scene that aren't located around the exact area where the crime occurred, that the judge might be like, I don't want that in there. You can't show that. That's way too prejudicial. So then what do? Even though it's a depiction of the entire crime scene, how does that work? And then, one of the other challenges and things to think about too with 3D rendering is you're making a 3-dimensional rendering of a photograph. And just like actual photography, depending on the lens you use, the perspective you render from, you can make things, even though it's the same size, look radically different depending on the angle of view. So it's a constant battle and that's another reason why it's always presented as a not to scale, demonstrative, fair and accurate representation of the scene. Not like, hey, this right here is what you would see if you were standing here, or this is exactly the way it would look if you were at the scene.
Yeah, and you could imagine that, as you say, that, it's sort of how you present it. The defense attorney could present it in a different way, from a different angle that looks entirely different. So we do
Absolutely.
have a question about what is that scanning app that you use on your phone? What's
Oh,
it again?
I have a bunch of them. I mean, the one that I like to use for like small models is it's called Scaniverse. And then there's another one that is called Polycam. And then one more that I like to use, but I haven't figured out a good way to get it off my phone. And I think in order to do that, you have to upload it to the cloud. So I didn't want to jump right into that. But it's one that you see in digital real estate. It's called Matterport. And that's a great one. I mean, it does have the LiDAR capability, but it's a really good one to go in and just take a 360 view. And I mean, you can spend 10 or 15 minutes at a location like an apartment, and you can end up getting something that's fully navigatable, that you can fully navigate. Like if you think of Google Street View, how you can go down to the street level and look around, you can
Right.
capture that with Matterport really easily. And there are paid functions to some of these apps, but I haven't paid for a single one. Like the free functionality is pretty good.
Well, this is great, and we really look forward to see how this evolves over the next several years. I'm going to turn it back to Sophia to now introduce yet another variation on crime analysts that prosecutors can work with.